The problem isn't finding material, folks, it's knowing when to stop. If I'm not careful, this could turn into the Kidnapping in Mythology channel. I don't think I want to be that guy, though. Hello, everyone. My name is Garvin, and lately it seems I take a single requested subject and talk it to death on the internet. Today, we're finalizing our look at kidnapping in mythology, and we're going to wrap it up by comparing a couple of famous stories the Trojan War, the Ramayana, the Russian story of the death of Koschei the Deathless, and the Chinese story of Ashima. I'm also going to touch briefly on the tragedy of Princess Tuag. Just as a side note, I've also found out there's a tradition of Queen Guinevere of the Arthurian myths being kidnapped, but I'm not going to include that here. If that's something y'all want to see, let's go with 10 likes and see if we pull it off this time, okay? Cool. Away we go. If you've watched my earlier videos, and I do recommend it, you're already aware of who Helen of Sparta was and what starts the Trojan War. The Trojan War breaks the mold a bit in that Menelaus isn't the protagonist of the Trojan War, but then the epic doesn't have a single protagonist per se. It is, however, an example of a kidnapping that leads to a rescue in the shape of a war, but with some elements of the quest thrown in. Now, it's debatable just how kidnapped Helen actually was, but let's point to the parts of the story that fit the themes I mapped out in the first video. Prince Paris accomplishes his kidnapping by taking advantage of diplomatic practices and the laws of host guest relationships, which most groups at the time would have found pretty vile. To be fair, if someone pulled something like that today, most of us would be upset too. The Greeks did, in some versions, have to conduct a number of tasks to recruit the warriors needed to build the army, most notably Achilles and Odysseus, who both actually have the strongest claim to being the protagonist, or at least a protagonist in the epic, I'm just going to point out. And that's where the elements of the quest come in. There's also a mountain of sequels to the Trojan War, as I'm sure we're all very well aware of. Now, before I get into the Ramayana, I want to note that this is something millions of people believe in, and I in no way mean any disrespect to their beliefs. I'm going to do my best to be tactful and respectful here. If I do inadvertently offend, I apologize. The Ramayana is the story of Prince Rama, who is worshipped as a Hindi deity in his own right, and the seventh avatar of Vishnu. For the purpose of this video, we're going to focus in on the abduction of Sita and the rescue attempt that provoked, but there is a lot more to this story, and I encourage everyone to give it a read. Sita herself is a divine figure miraculously born from the earth and raised as royalty. She was married to Prince Rama and afterwards was kidnapped by the demon Ravana, who desired her for himself. Quick note here, much like some traditions have Helen from the Trojan War replaced by a clone made out of clouds, some traditions have Sita replaced by Maya Sita, who is made out of flame. Maya Sita, however, becomes a character in her own right and is eventually reincarnated as the heroine Drupadi or as a goddess. Sita, like most of the kidnapping victims in these stories, is someone of great beauty and virtue, and Ravana uses a combination of lies and shape-shifting magic to defeat her protections and carry her off. Cedars Rescue combines elements of the quest and the war as I discussed in my first video. Rama must accomplish a number of deeds just to gather followers, find out where Sita's even been taken to, and get an army together, aided by his most important follower, the ape hero Hanuman. And only after many heroics and larger than life actions does Rama finally confront Ravana and kill him, ending the war. Much like the Trojan War epic, there are a lot of different versions, and I'm leaving out a lot of details since the Ramayana is a rather vast story. There's also quite a bit of the story that comes after the war, just dealing with the fallout. And I'm going to let you discover those bits for yourself. I encourage you to look this story up. Next up is the death of Koschei the Deathless. This follows the adventures of a young prince named Ivan, who, after the death of his parents and the marriage of his three sisters to three powerful wizards, finds himself married to a beautiful warlord named Maria Morvana. While they were happy and in love, warlords got a war. So one day, Maria gathers her armies to ride off to do incredible violence to some unlucky sod, while telling her husband Ivan, "You're in charge of the house while I'm gone. Don't open up the dungeon." I get a chuckle out of this because, admittedly, it's usually a male character saying that to a young lady, so the role reversal is fun. Well, much like the young ladies in the other stories, Ivan can't help but open up the dungeon for a peek and he finds our villain. Koschei quickly outwits our hero, who was not married for his wits, and kidnaps Maria, but out of regard for Ivan's somewhat dim-witted kindness, lets him live with a warning as he flies off with the guy's wife. Now, I've been told Ivan in this story displays something that the kids call himbo energy. He's brave, he's loyal, he's kind, but he don't learn too good. He attempts several rescues for his wife and fails each one. In fact, Koschei just kills him out of frustration at one point. But the intervention of Ivan's brother-in-laws, those powerful wizards from earlier, bring him back to life. With their advice, Ivan then undertakes a quest to gather the resources he needs to defeat Koschei. Most significantly, a magic horse that he has to get from Baba Yaga. Oh, yeah, that Baba Yaga. He does, however, manage to win the horse, mainly through his kindness to other creatures. So, kids, if you can't be cunning, be kind. It'll help. And uses it to rescue his wife. And the horse is also instrumental in the final confrontation with Koschei, which, given the title of the story, I think everyone listening has figured out ends badly for him. This is a pretty pure example of the quest. The biggest difference is that Koschei, unlike most of our kidnappers, isn't motivated by lust, but by vengeance. And I suppose you could argue that Maria herself kidnapped him, since she was keeping him in a dungeon. I kind of wish there were more stories about Maria, honestly. Like, how'd she even get Koschei in that dungeon in the first place? No one has explained this to me, and I really want to know. So if you know, please leave a note for me in the comments. I'm begging you. Ashima, unlike our last three kidnapping victims, isn't a princess, a queen, or a semi-divine being. She's a member of the Sani people, an ethnic group from southwest China, specifically speaking from inside the Yunnan province. The story goes that she was a beautiful and kind woman that everyone loved, and she was kidnapped by the local landlord's son. The plot was to force her to marry him. Well, her true love, a he, wasn't about to take that lying down, so he challenges the landlord's son to a singing contest, one that lasted 3 days and nights. What do you even sing that takes that long? I don't know. He won, though, and the people forced the landlord's son to release Ashima. Although I feel like if they could just force him to release her, what do you need the singing contest for? But sure. The story does end on a tragic note, however, as Ashima drowns in a flood on the way home. This does, however, fit the quest outline, although there are no sequels given the sad and rather tragic ending. Lastly, I'm going to speak on a story that doesn't fit my outline, but there are exceptions to every rule. This is the tragedy of Princess Tuag. Princess Tuag was born to a king of Ireland, in some versions the High King Conall. Even as an infant, she was shockingly beautiful, and she was given to another family as a foster child to raise before King Conall's murder. Another High King, Conair Mór, heard of her and decided he wanted the child in his court. So he hired the bard, Furfi, who used a magical song to put everyone to sleep and carry the baby away. At which point, King Moore turned around and hired the same bard to raise her and teach her everything he knew. Because of this, Princess Tuag not only grew up beautiful, but with an amazing singing voice and wondrous knowledge and charm. This attracted the sea god Manannan MacLear. See, I told you we'd get back to him. MacLear wasn't about to do his own kidnapping, but he figured if the bard could do it once, he could do it again. So he hired Furfi to kidnap his own student. Now, Furfi wasn't excited to do this, but he wasn't about to piss off a god either. And I can understand where he's coming from on this one. So, once again, he puts everyone to sleep, including the princess, and carries her off. However, on the side of the river Ban, Furfi left the princess to go fetch a boat and take her out to sea. While he was gone, a great wave rises from the ocean, carrying her out to the sea while she's asleep and drowning her. Or so the story goes. I'm kind of wondering if the sea god didn't pull some shenanigans here to avoid having to pay for the bard's services. Either way, this is a tragic story where the kidnapping ends badly and there is no rescue. I know I'm ending on kind of a downer here, but I wanted to show that not all kidnappings end with a rescue, and that there is always an element of tragedy lurking in these stories. I think, however, this is a good place to stop talking about kidnapping, and I'm going to address some of the other requests of my Everwise patrons. That said, I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you did, please leave a like or a comment. Feel free to subscribe and ring that bell, as that does help me in my eternal struggle with Dreadlord Algorithm. Terror be on his name. You can always join my Everwise patrons for as little as $1 a month and access polls for future content, blooper files, and more. I'd like to end this video with a special thanks to my biggest supporter, Big Steve. As always, man, I appreciate you. Next week, we head back to House Atreides by special request. We'll be covering the remaining members of that unhappy house of Greek myth. I hope to see you there, and until then, stay safe, keep reading.